I came home from the hospital thinking I'd rest in my own bed, but my son looked me in the eye and said, "Dad, your room's taken. Sleep in the garage." The sting cut deeper than the winter cold. I had sold my ranch to buy that very house for him. I stayed silent, but silence isn't surrender. While they mocked me, I was quietly securing a villa of my own, and the day I opened those doors, it wasn't me left out in the cold anymore. It was them. Follow my story to the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I know how far my story has reached. The paper felt heavier than it should have when the nurse handed me my discharge documents. My heart surgery was behind me, at least on paper. But the weight inside my chest wasn't just stitches or healing muscle. It was something deeper, a hope I carried like a fragile candle, hoping the flame would catch again once I returned to the only place I still called home. I smiled weakly at the nurse, insisting I didn't need a wheelchair escort to the curb. Pride can be a stubborn thing at 74, even when the body protests. My legs trembled as I walked through the sterile hallway of Mercy General, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like distant hornets. The hospital doors opened and winter slapped against my face. Cold, sharp air, the kind that carries December's warning. My first thought was simple. Darren would be pulling up any minute. I called him. The phone rang longer than usual before his voice broke through, distracted. "Dad, what is it?" Plates clattered in the background, voices overlapping. "I'm ready. The nurse says I'm clear to go. Can you swing by?" My words carried more relief than I intended, as if just asking for a ride meant I was still tethered to him. He sighed, muffling the receiver to answer someone at the table. "Listen, Marla's family's here. We're having dinner. Can you figure something else out? Maybe a cab?" There was no malice in his tone, only absence. Indifference cuts deeper than anger. For a second, I stood frozen on the steps of Mercy General. The phone pressed to my ear, the silence stretching between us like an unbridgeable canyon. "I understand," I said quietly. He didn't hear it. He'd already gone back to his world, the clatter and chatter filling the line before it clicked dead. My chest tightened, not from the surgery but from the memory that rushed in uninvited. The ranch, the one I sold 15 years ago. I gave up my land, my pride, the cattle I'd raised from calves, so Darren could afford that Westerville colonial with the white columns Marla had always admired. I told myself it was a gift to the future, that roots planted in Ohio soil would hold us together. Roots don't always grow where you expect. The nurse, noticing me still standing by the sliding doors, asked if I wanted help calling for a taxi. I shook my head. "I'll manage." My voice came out steadier than I felt. The cab smelled faintly of pine air freshener and old coffee. As we drove through the city, I pressed my hand against the cool glass, tracing the streets that had witnessed my grandchildren's laughter. We passed the little park where Tommy learned to ride without training wheels, his helmet too big for his head. Then the old wooden bridge where Lily once leaned over the railing, pointing at ducks with the joy only children can summon. Each landmark was a pinprick, each memory a reminder of how close love can feel, and how far it drifts when unreciprocated. By the time the cab turned into the quiet subdivision, night had fully arrived. The houses glowed with warm Christmas lights, strings of color wrapping porches and bushes. Darren's house stood darker than the rest. The porch light was off, and on the mat in front of the door, a cheerful word stared up at me. "Welcome, family." The irony sank into my bones heavier than the December chill. I pulled out my phone again, fingers stiff from the cold. Darren answered quickly this time, his voice low. "Dad, don't make a thing of it, all right? Crash somewhere. We'll talk later." The line went dead before I could reply. Crash somewhere. Like I was a teenager overstaying my welcome instead of the man who built the foundation under his life. Hand shaking, I reached for the doorknob. Just then, muffled voices filtered through, deeper, unfamiliar. A man's laugh that didn't belong. A woman's reply. Sharp and close. My own key turned in the lock, and before the door opened, a burst of laughter spilled into the winter night. The door gave way under my hand, and the warmth that spilled out felt foreign. A row of coats hung along the entryway, bulky parkas and fur-lined boots that I had never seen before. The scent of unfamiliar perfume lingered in the air, masking the faint trace of Evelyn's lavender sachet I used to notice when stepping inside. For a moment, I stood frozen, suitcase at my side, as if I were a visitor. Not the man who once signed the deed to this place. The sound of voices carried from the living room, laughter that didn't belong to my family. My feet moved almost on their own, each step heavier than the last as I crossed the threshold into what had been my home. A pang of unease struck deep. This house had shifted in my absence, and I was no longer sure where I fit within its walls. Upstairs, the hall light was on, spilling out from the bedroom that had been mine. My pulse quickened. I gripped the banister and climbed slowly, the familiar creak of the steps echoing memories of tucking Darren into bed, of Evelyn calling me to dinner. Those memories collided with the sight that met me at the top. Luther Byro's frame filled the doorway, his jacket tossed carelessly across the chair where Evelyn once laid out quilts. Vera knelt by the dresser, sliding open drawers that once held my socks and shirts. A suitcase sat open on the quilt that Evelyn had stitched with her hands, its bright patchwork dulled by the weight of Vera's belongings. On the dresser, a picture of Evelyn and me on our wedding day was shoved aside, half hidden behind a bottle of lotion. The shock left me momentarily breathless. Luther grunted, pressing down on the mattress with a dissatisfied groan. "Too soft," he muttered. "We'll have to put a board under it." Vera glanced up, startled by my shadow in the doorway. "Oh, Burl," she said, as though she had every right to be there, unpacking in the room where I once found rest after long days. Before I could speak, Darren's voice cut through the hallway. "Dad!" He moved quickly, intercepting me, his arm stretched across the doorframe like a guard. His eyes didn't hold guilt, only a cold firmness. "They're staying here for a while," he said. "It makes sense. They pay rent. It helps us." Rent. The word hit like a slap. My throat tightened as I tried to remind him. This house had been bought with money from the sale of my ranch, the land I had worked until my hands bled. "Darren," I managed, "I built this for you, for your family. That's your mother's quilt they're sitting on." He didn't flinch. "It's our house now," he replied, each word deliberate. A wall between us. Marla appeared in the hallway, her lips pressed in a thin line. She didn't bother with courtesy. "The garage has a heater. He can stay there until we figure something else out." She gestured downward, her tone final, her eyes daring me to argue. Darren said nothing. He didn't defend me, didn't even hesitate. His silence was a crueler blow than her words. I felt stripped bare in that moment, as though my years of sacrifice had been erased with a single glance. The trek down to the garage felt longer than my weary heart could carry. The light bulb overhead flickered as I stepped inside, my suitcase dragging across the cold cement. Tools cluttered the shelves, boxes were stacked high, and in the middle sat a cot, thin blanket folded at its foot, prepared as if I were no more than another item stored away. My hand trembled as I set the suitcase down. Marla's words echoed, "The garage is warm enough." Darren's silence echoed louder still. There was no shouting, no defiance left to give. The humiliation pressed heavy. Yet something inside refused to break. I had learned long ago that silence could be a weapon, a shield stronger than fury. Through the thin walls, laughter carried from the kitchen. Luther's booming voice, Vera's chatter, Marla clinking dishes, Darren's softer tones, all of it blended into the hum of a life that no longer needed me at its center. Each sound pressed against me, each one reminding me of the seat I had lost at the table. The cot creaked as I sat down, coat still on, the chill of the cement seeping through my shoes. My gaze lingered on the single small window above the workbench. Snowflakes drifted past, silent and pure, indifferent to the storm inside these walls. My lips parted, a whisper escaping into the dark. This isn't my home anymore. I lay back on the cot, the blanket scratchy against my neck, and closed my eyes as strangers' laughter spilled through the walls of the house I once paid for. The morning light pushed weakly through the small square window above the garage workbench. It fell across the cot where my back ached and my breath rose in pale clouds. The smell of oil, cardboard, and cold cement reminded me I hadn't dreamed last night's humiliation. It was real. My body protested every move as I sat up, my chest tight from the surgery and the weight of being cast out. The garage door creaked open. Two small figures stood there, their eyes wider than the morning sun behind them. Tommy, 10 years old with a shock of messy hair, and Lily, just 8, clutched the door handle with both hands. Their voices broke the silence. "Grandpa, why are you here?" I froze, ashamed that they had to see me like this, sitting among tools and boxes instead of by the warmth of a kitchen table. Their innocent faces carried more shock and concern than any adult had shown me the night before. Tommy stepped in first, his sneakers squeaking against the concrete. "This isn't fair," he blurted, voice trembling with both confusion and anger. "Grandpa belongs inside." Lily's eyes filled with tears as she hurried to my side. She wrapped her little arms around mine, her cheek cold against my sleeve. "Did Daddy make you sleep here?" No words came. Their questions were daggers wrapped in love. The sight of Lily's tears nearly undid me. My heart swelled with pain and pride at once. Pain that they had to witness this. Pride that they still saw me for who I was. Before I could answer, the kitchen door slammed. Darren's footsteps hit the garage floor with sharp impatience. His jaw was tight, his face red. "Kids, what are you doing out here?" Tommy turned, shoulders squared in a way I'd never seen before. "Dad, why's Grandpa in the garage? He should be inside. This is his house, too." Darren's eyes flicked to me, then back to his children. His voice snapped, hard and defensive. "They're paying rent. You're not." The words struck sharper than any blow. They reduced my life's sacrifices, selling the ranch, helping him buy this very colonial home, to nothing more than a forgotten ledger. Behind him, Marla appeared, arms folded, her silence as heavy as stone. She didn't defend me, didn't soften the blow. She simply stood there, lips pressed tight, watching the exchange as though it were a chore to endure. Tommy's face twisted in disbelief. "But he's our grandpa!" he shouted, his small fists balled at his sides. Lily clung tighter to me, sobbing harder. Their outrage stood against the cold calculation in Darren's words. I didn't speak. I let silence be my only answer. Inside, every muscle wanted to rise, to shout that this was my house too, that their warmth was built on my sacrifices. But I bit it back. My silence was a choice now, not weakness. Their eyes told me enough. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining the cruelty. Darren finally pulled the kids away, muttering something about breakfast. As he pushed the garage door closed, Tommy's head turned back toward me. His eyes were wide, torn between obedience and loyalty. That single glance, filled with sorrow, cut me deeper than Darren's words. I sat back on the cot, the cold seeping once again into my bones. From beyond the thin wall, I heard clattering dishes, Vera's chatter, Luther's booming laugh. Marla's voice joined in, smooth and confident. Darren's voice blended among theirs, but never once did it call for me. The laughter sounded louder than it should have, a reminder that I had been pushed outside, not just by accident, but by design. My coat stayed wrapped around me, a thin shield against both the cold and the rejection pressing in on all sides. Yet through the ache and humiliation, something stirred. The loyalty of two small voices had carved a space inside me that no insult could erase. Darren's cutting words circled in my mind. "They pay rent. You don't." The phrase repeated, sharper each time, until it etched a line I knew I would not ignore forever. For now, I stayed still. But deep inside, silence had limits. The sound of forks and laughter drifted through the walls, cutting into the silence of the garage like knives. My stomach was empty. But pride kept me sitting there on the cot until the ache grew sharper than hunger. At some point, resolve outweighed weariness, and I rose, dusting the cold from my coat sleeves. If I stayed quiet forever, I'd vanish into these walls like another forgotten tool. When I opened the kitchen door, the warmth hit me first, the smell of roasted chicken, the buttery steam of mashed potatoes. Around the table, Darren sat with Marla, Luther, Vera, and the kids. everyone with plates heaping and glasses full. For a moment, no one noticed me standing there, my own house. Yet I had to wait for someone to acknowledge I was breathing. Finally. Lily's eyes met mine. She started to rise, but Marla gave her a slight shake of the head. My granddaughter sat back down quietly. I pulled out the chair nearest the door and let the legs scrape the hardwood. The sound cut through the chatter. Heads turned. "I won't stay in that garage again," I said. The words surprised even me, steady, low, but firm. My hand trembled on the back of the chair, yet my voice held. The room froze. Forks hovered in midair. For a heartbeat, there was silence thicker than the snow outside. Then Luther chuckled, shaking his head as if he'd heard a good joke. "It's not so bad, old man," he said, spearing another piece of chicken. "Plenty of folks live worse. A cot's good enough, ain't it?" Vera added with a shrug. "You've got a roof, don't you? Some people don't." She reached for the breadbasket as if I were no more pressing than the salt shaker. Their words didn't just bruise, they stripped. My late wife's voice rose in memory, reminding me how many years I'd worked, how many hours I'd driven trucks, saved dollars, bent my back to give Darren a start. And now her photograph sat in a dresser drawer under someone else's socks while I was told to be thankful for concrete and tools. Darren's voice came next, sharper than any of theirs. "Dad," he said, loud enough to still the clinking of silverware. "Don't embarrass us. You should be grateful we let you stay at all." Every syllable stung. "Grateful to be banished to the garage of the house I paid for." Marla leaned back, arms crossed, giving him a small nod of approval, as if he had done his duty by cutting me down. Across the table, Tommy and Lily stared. Tommy's mouth opened slightly, as if to argue, but Darren gave him a glance that silenced the boy. Lily leaned toward her brother, whispering something, their faces pale with confusion and shame. They shouldn't have had to witness this, children learning that cruelty could sit comfortably at a family dinner. Heat burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let it spill. Without a word, I pulled my coat tighter, turned, and left the room. The sound of Luther's booming laugh resumed almost immediately, like my warning had never been spoken at all. The cold in the garage closed over me once more. But inside, something colder had started to harden. I wouldn't raise my voice yet. I wouldn't fight for scraps of dignity in front of those who enjoyed watching it stripped away. But the line had been drawn. The sound of their laughter followed me back into the cold. But in my chest, something colder had begun to harden. The morning light pressed faintly through the thin garage window, turning the cold concrete floor a pale gray. My body ached from the cot, but instead of the despair that had kept me awake the last 2 nights, there was a strange calm in my chest. Darren's words from the dinner table replayed in my mind. "You should be grateful we let you stay at all." They had cut deep, but this morning they felt less like a wound and more like fuel. Something in me had shifted. When I pushed open the door to the kitchen, the smell of bacon and coffee wrapped around me, but the warmth felt foreign, not inviting. Darren sat at the head of the table, his eyes fixed on the plate in front of him, not on me. Marla's voice carried cheerfulness that felt too polished, too rehearsed. "More juice, Vera?" she asked her mother, fussing over the guests like a perfect hostess. Luther leaned back in his chair, smacking his lips, while Tommy and Lily sat with their heads lowered, their small hands folded tight around their forks. No one offered me a seat. I stood for a moment, the sound of clinking silverware filling the space. Marla's smile flicked toward me for just a second, as if acknowledging a stranger who had wandered in by mistake. My chest tightened, but this time it wasn't with humiliation. It was resolve. I placed my hand firmly on the table, steady though my fingers trembled slightly. "I've given more than enough," I said, my voice low but carrying through the room. "I won't be treated like a guest in the house I built." The air shifted. Darren's fork froze midair. Tommy and Lily lifted their eyes, wide and alert. Even Luther stopped chewing for a beat. My words landed heavier than I expected. The kind of truth that can't be shrugged away. But Marla was quick. She set her fork down delicately. her smile never fading. "We all know Dad's tired," she said, looking at Darren but making sure everyone could hear. "Maybe it's time he signed things over. Let us manage for him." She framed it like concern, like an act of love. Her tone was soft, almost gentle. But every word carried the edge of a blade. Signed things over, managed for him. I could hear what she meant. Remove him, take control, erase the last piece of independence I still had. My chest tightened, but not from fear. No, it was anger, deep and cold. Darren stared at his plate again, saying nothing. His silence was worse than agreement. It was surrender. His eyes refused to meet mine. And in that silence, the distance between father and son grew wider than it had ever been. Tommy shifted in his chair. Lily looked from Darren to me. Confusion painted across her face. She was too young to understand the politics of property or control, but she understood betrayal. I said nothing more. The battle line had been drawn, and speaking further would only give Marla more rope to tighten around me, so I stepped away, the weight of the room pressing down, and walked back toward the garage. Later that morning, as the house quieted, I heard the faint shuffle of small feet. Lily slipped into the garage, clutching a piece of paper with crayon marks smeared across it. She held it out without a word. On it, she had drawn our family, Darren, Marla, Tommy, and herself. But at the center, larger than the rest, was me, her grandpa. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes. I folded the drawing carefully, tucking it into my shirt pocket like it was the most valuable document in the world. Back on the cot, I pressed my hand against the drawing, holding it close to my chest. My dignity might be questioned, my place in the family mocked, but Marla's words had given me clarity. This was no longer about comfort or even shelter. It was about survival. It was about legacy, and I would not let them erase me. Marla's words echoed like a verdict. Maybe it's time Dad signed things over. The cold concrete floor of the garage had become a companion. That morning, as I bent down to toss some scraps into the trash bin, something unusual caught my eye. A torn envelope, half buried under old wrappers, carried my name. I pulled it out carefully, smoothing the crumpled paper with stiff fingers. The letter inside spoke of pending account changes and confirmation required, but it had been ripped, discarded before I ever saw it whole. My stomach tightened. Why was mail with my name hidden here instead of in my hands? The thought gnawed at me as I sat on the cot, staring at the jagged edges of the letter. Memories of Marla's sly smile at breakfast. Her suggestion that I should sign things over replayed in my head. I felt the weight of something darker than just cold treatment. They weren't content to shove me into a garage. They wanted me gone on paper, too. When the house grew quiet that afternoon, Darren gone at work and the in-laws out shopping, I made my way inside. The familiar creak of the stairs and hum of the furnace mocked me, reminders that I once called this place home. Instead of heading to the kitchen, I turned toward Darren's study. His office door was closed, but not locked. The air smelled faintly of cologne and printer ink. On his desk lay a neat stack of papers, too neat. Curiosity and dread pulled me forward. I sifted through folders with my name typed in bold at the top. Deeds, bank statements, account summaries. My chest tightened as I noticed small but deliberate changes. Addresses altered, signatures sloppily traced, balances shifted. My own name looked back at me, but the pen that wrote it wasn't mine. A voice floated down the hall, muffled but sharp. I froze. Marla. I leaned toward the crack of the door and heard her on the phone. Yes. Once it's signed over, we'll manage everything. He's too old to keep up. Don't worry. The documents are in motion. My pulse pounded in my ears. The puzzle fit together. The missing mail, her manipulation at breakfast, and now this. I slipped out before she noticed, clutching a photocopy of one of the altered statements. My hands shook, but my mind had never felt clearer. This wasn't just disrespect, it was theft in progress. I needed help, and I knew exactly who to call. Sterling Vance's office smelled of old leather and dust. the way law offices often do when the shelves have held more battles than decorations. Sterling, an old acquaintance from town, looked up from behind his glasses as I entered. "Burl Harlow, it's been a long time." His voice carried both warmth and concern when he saw the papers I laid before him. He spread them across his desk, adjusting a lamp to the right angle. With slow precision, he compared signatures, traced lines with a finger, and finally leaned back with a sigh that chilled me more than the garage ever had. "These aren't yours. Someone's forging your name, Burl. They're setting you up. If these documents move further, you could lose everything, legally." The word forgery hung in the air like a hammer strike. My heart pounded against my ribs, not from weakness but from rage buried deep. Sterling looked me in the eye, his tone grave. "You're not just being pushed out of your home, they're erasing you." I left his office with the papers tucked under my arm, Sterling's warning echoing in my ears. Outside, the December air bit hard at my face, but I welcomed it. At least the cold wind was honest. As the cab took me back to Westerville, my hand slipped into my pocket, fingers brushing against the folded drawing Lily had given me. In that child's picture, I still stood at the center of the family. Back in the garage, I sat on the cot, the forged documents and Lily's drawing resting side by side. One was proof of betrayal, the other proof of loyalty. My breath fogged the air, and I felt something solid forming inside me. They wanted to erase me, but I had no intention of fading quietly. Sterling's words still echoed as the night grew deeper. "They're not just pushing you out, Burl, they're erasing you." Sunday morning came with a sharp winter chill, the kind that crept into the bones before breakfast. I buttoned my coat and made the familiar walk to church, hoping the service might give me a sliver of peace. The bell rang across Westerville, echoing through the streets, steady as always. Inside, though, something felt different. The pews were full. Faces turned toward me as I entered, not in greeting, but in hesitation. Eyes lingered, then slid away, as if my presence carried a weight they'd rather not acknowledge. I nodded to a few familiar folks, but their smiles faltered. My seat, the one I had shared with Evelyn for so many years, felt colder without her. I tried to focus on the hymns, on the scripture read aloud, but Darren's posture at the front of the church unsettled me. He stood straighter than usual, his tie tightened perfectly, as if preparing for more than worship. When the pastor yielded the floor for announcements, Darren stepped forward. My heart quickened. His voice was calm, polished. "Friends," he began, "I want to share something personal today. It's about my father." I stiffened. Whispers stirred in the pews. "He's been struggling," Darren said, his tone heavy with false concern. "Some of you may have noticed. Forgetting things, losing track of time. We've had to step in more than once to make sure he's safe. We're doing all we can to support him." Each word was chosen carefully, not accusing, but pitying. Heads nodded in sympathy. A neighbor leaned toward another, murmuring. My chest tightened. I wanted to rise, to speak, but my voice stayed trapped. Then he added, "Managing a home, finances, responsibilities, it's too much for him now. We ask for your prayers as we make the best decisions for his care." My name, my dignity, was laid bare like a cautionary tale. Murmurs rippled through the congregation, and the pity in their eyes burned worse than any insult. As I sat frozen, Marla moved like a shadow among the pews. Her whispers were a poison no sermon could wash away. "He wanders at night," I overheard her tell Mrs. Halpern. "Darren had to save him from financial ruin." To another she said, "He nearly signed the wrong papers. Thank God we caught it." The rumors spread quickly, more contagious than any truth I could have offered. By the time Darren finished his performance, a narrative had settled like dust over the congregation. Burl Harlow was no longer fit to manage his own life. I sat still, my knuckles white against the hymnal. Around me, old friends avoided my gaze. These were the same people who had celebrated Evelyn's life beside me, who had once asked my advice about mortgages, repairs, or marriages. Now they saw me through Darren's lens, fragile, fading, a man to be pitied, not respected. The humiliation burned deep. For the first time, I felt Evelyn's absence not as grief, but as a lack of shield. She would have spoken up, cut through Darren's lies with grace and fire. Without her, I was left in silence. A hand touched my arm. Fern Mallory, seated beside me, leaned close. "Don't let their whispers bury you," she said quietly. "I know you, Burl. Not everyone believes them." Her voice steadied the storm inside me. In that small gesture, I found an anchor. After the service, I stepped outside, the cold air biting harder than before. People passed me with polite nods, but none lingered. Darren and Marla stood near the church steps, basking in sympathy. Their smiles were careful, triumphant. I walked to the side of the yard, heart pounding. Humiliation had always been something to swallow, something endured in silence. But as the crowd's whispers echoed, a fire sparked where shame once sat. Sterling Vance approached, hands in his coat pockets. "You heard what they're planting," he said. "I heard," I answered, voice low but steady. "And I won't let them take any more from me." It wasn't bluster, it wasn't rage. It was resolve. Forged not in noise, but in the quiet certainty that a man's dignity couldn't be signed away, no matter how many lies filled the air. The crowd's whispers still rang in my ears, but inside me, a fire had started to burn. Saturday came with the kind of sharp winter air that bit through the coat, the kind that reminded a man of how alive his bones still were, even if his son wished otherwise. When I stepped onto Darren's porch, I didn't come alone. Sterling Vance walked beside me, his briefcase in hand. That detail didn't escape anyone. The moment the door opened, the air inside shifted. Marla froze mid-sentence, her smile faltering, and Darren's eyes locked on the man beside me with suspicion he couldn't quite mask. The living room was full, the biros planted on the sofa like they owned the place. Marla perched neatly with her arms linked through her father's, and Vera fussing over the coffee table as though she were hostess here. My grandchildren lingered near the staircase, wide-eyed, sensing something about to break. Darren's greeting was stiff. "Dad, Sterling." His voice lacked warmth, more a warning than welcome. He waved toward the chairs but made no effort to hide the flicker of annoyance. Marla leaned close to Luther, whispering just loud enough, "He really shouldn't be here. You'll see soon." Her words weren't meant for me, but I caught them all the same. I set my coat across the chair back and let Sterling take the lead. He opened his case with calm precision, spreading the papers across the table. The chatter in the room quieted. I rested a hand on the first page, my voice even. "These," I said, "aren't my signatures." The silence deepened. "I didn't sign away my name, or my house, or my accounts." Sterling's voice carried authority. "These documents have been altered, forged. I verified them myself, and I'll stand by that in any court." He tapped the paper with one long finger, letting the words sink in. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the furnace. Then the explosion came. Luther surged forward, face red. "Paranoia," Vera chimed in, her voice sharp. "They're doing you a favor. Burl, Darren and Marla are taking care of what you can't handle anymore." Their shouting rattled the walls, but I stayed still. I looked at Darren, searching for any flicker of honesty. He didn't meet my eyes. The noise broke when Tommy's voice cut through. "Stop lying!" My grandson's fists clenched at his sides. "I heard Mom on the phone about the house. She said Grandpa wouldn't know." Lily clung to my arm, her small voice shaking but clear. "He belongs here more than anyone." Their words landed heavier than any accusation I could have spoken. The room stilled. Even Marla's lips parted, caught off guard by the honesty of children who hadn't learned how to twist the truth. I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice. I simply looked at Darren. His silence was louder than any denial. For the first time since this all began, the balance shifted. The power no longer belonged to the ones shouting. That night, I left the house without anger. Only the memory of my grandchildren's voices echoing in my chest, For the first time in months, I felt less alone. Monday morning came cold and gray, but the chill I felt wasn't just from the December air. Whispers carried down the street louder than the wind, riding on the backs of neighbors who had seen too much and heard more. Fern was the first to tell me. She stopped by the villa with a bag of muffins, her eyes sharp with the kind of truth you couldn't buy. "They're talking, Burl," she said softly, placing the bag on my table. "At the coffee shop, at the grocery, folks don't like what Darren did. They think he crossed a line." Later that day, I heard it myself. At the diner, two men I'd known for years sat in the booth behind me. Their voices carried. "Imagine that, putting your own father in the garage. And then those papers?" One of them clicked his tongue, shaking his head. "Shameful." For the first time in weeks, I wasn't the one under suspicion. Darren was. By midweek, the cracks showed. Darren walked down Main Street like a man trying to hold on to dignity with both fists. But his smile didn't land. Old friends gave him polite nods, nothing more. At the hardware store, I overheard a clerk mutter, "Poor Burl, built that house for his family, and now he's pushed out." At home, Marla wasn't having it. Fern told me she heard Marla's voice through an open window one night, sharp, angry, dripping with poison. "He's ruining us. He wants everyone to think we're monsters." Darren didn't fight her words. He never did. That morning, I sat at the villa's kitchen table, sunlight warming the wooden floor. On the wall above me hung Lily's drawing, framed just as I promised her. In the picture, I stood in the center, Tommy and Lily holding my hands, the rest of the family drawn smaller, almost in the background. The innocence of it steadied me, the quiet was welcome, but I knew better than to trust peace when war was brewing, so I met with Sterling Vance. His office smelled of leather and old books, and the man behind the desk looked at me not with pity but with resolve. "Burl," he said, laying out the papers. "This isn't just family squabble anymore. These documents, altered signatures, fake dates, they're felonies. I'm filing for an injunction this week. We'll protect your estate and expose this fraud." I leaned back, the weight of his words pressing into me. For months I had been swallowing humiliation, thinking silence was strength. Now Sterling was giving my silence a voice, one backed by law. "They'll fight dirty," I muttered. "They already are," he replied, tapping the forgeries. "But this time, you're not fighting alone." Later, Fern stopped by again. She poured us both coffee at my table, her presence quiet but steady. I admitted what had been gnawing at me. All these years, I thought holding my tongue was the right thing, letting things go, not stirring trouble. She met my eyes. "There's a difference between keeping peace and letting yourself be erased." Her words settled into me like steel. By Friday, word reached me that Marla had been overheard again, this time telling a friend at church. "We'll drag him through court until he breaks." Darren stood by her side, silent but complicit. Their malice no longer surprised me. It only clarified what I had to do. The whispers in town had turned, and Sterling was ready. For the first time since stepping out of that hospital weeks ago, I felt something stronger than humiliation. I felt prepared. Sterling's warning echoed as I left his office that afternoon. This is just the beginning. And he was right. If they wanted a war in court, I would meet them there, with truth as my weapon. The courthouse in downtown Columbus rose above the street like a fortress. Its stone columns and wide marble steps gleamed in the winter sun. A place built to hold truth steady even when family ties frayed. Walking up those steps, my legs felt heavier than they had in years, yet Fern's hand on my arm steadied me. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered, her voice warm against the cold wind. Inside, the air smelled of polish and paper, the hushed tones of clerks and lawyers filling the grand hall. Darren and Marla were already there, seated with Luther and Vera as if the pew-like benches belonged to them. Darren looked smug, a faint smirk tugging at his lips when his eyes met mine. Marla dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, preparing for a performance. When court was called to order, their attorney rose first. His voice was smooth, trained to bend pity. "Your Honor, My clients are simply trying to care for Mr. Harlow. He's 74, widowed, recovering from heart surgery, confused, forgetful, vulnerable. He glanced back at me, as if I were already buried. It's clear he was manipulated into decisions not in his best interest. Marla sniffled on cue, lowering her gaze like a grieving saint. We only want to make sure he's safe. She murmured loudly enough for the room to hear. Her crocodile tears glistened under the fluorescent lights. The murmurs in the gallery stung worse than the cold. Neighbors. Old acquaintances. People I'd shaken hands with at church. People who once asked me for advice, now whispered and shifted in their seats. When it was my turn, I stood slower than I wanted, my knees reminding me of every year lived. The clerk swore me in, and I sat at the witness stand, the wood cool beneath my palm. I didn't shout. I didn't match their theatrics. My voice came low, steady. I gave up my ranch so Darren could have his first home. I worked until my heart gave out to put him through school. Every dime I saved went to building what we called family. A pause stretched in the room, the kind that makes people lean forward without knowing it. And yet, I continued, eyes fixed on the judge. When I came home from the hospital, I was told my room was gone, my place was gone, my dignity, too, if they had their way. My voice wavered for just a moment, not from weakness, but from the weight of memory. I thought of Evelyn, my late wife, how she had once been honored in our church just blocks away. I may be old, but I'm not confused. I know what's mine, and I know when trust has been broken. The judge studied me, expression unreadable, but the silence told me enough. Sincerity was louder than tears. Then came Sterling's turn. My old friend adjusted his glasses, his briefcase snapping open like a gavel in itself. He began pulling out papers, real papers, notarized, stamped with official seals. These, he said firmly, holding them up, are legitimate records, and these, he placed another stack on the table with a sharp smack, are not. Signatures attributed to Mr. Harlow, except handwriting analysis shows otherwise. And here, Your Honor, are bank statements tied to transfers initiated without his knowledge. The courtroom shifted, a collective intake of breath. Sterling didn't stop. We also have witness testimony. He gestured to Fern, who stepped forward, her voice clear. I heard Marla discussing banks and property in Burrell's name. I saw documents on their table before Burrell was even told. Darren's smirk cracked. His lawyer stammered an objection, but the judge waved it aside. Marla's face twisted, her mask slipping as her voice shot across the room. He's lying! He doesn't even know what day it is half the time. The judge slammed the gavel once. Order! The more she ranted, the clearer it became who was unstable, and it wasn't me. Darren tried to rein her in, but his own words tangled as Sterling pressed the contradictions. The calm confidence they'd brought in with them leaked away, leaving only anger and fear. By the time the judge leaned forward to speak, the tide had fully turned. This court finds sufficient evidence of forgery and misrepresentation. Pending final ruling, Darren Kehoe and Marla Kehoe are barred from accessing or managing Mr. Harlow's estate. The gavel struck. The sound was final, like a door closing on years of betrayal. Outside, the cold air wrapped around me again, but it felt different, lighter. The stone steps no longer seemed so steep. Fern squeezed my arm. Sterling clapped my shoulder. Across the street, the city moved on with its day. Cars passing, people rushing, but for me, time slowed just long enough to take a breath free of their lies. As I stepped into the sunlight, one truth settled deep in my chest. This battle wasn't just about property. It was about my dignity, and I had finally reclaimed it. Evening settled over the villa like a blanket, the kind that was supposed to bring calm, but instead felt heavy with waiting. The courthouse battle was still fresh in my mind. Sterling's words echoing like a promise. We're close, Burrell, closer than you think. I sat in my recliner, the lamp casting a soft pool of light across the room. Lily's drawing hung framed above the mantel, a reminder of the love that still tethered me to this fractured family. The phone rang, slicing through the quiet. My heart gave a jolt. At that hour, no call could be good news. I picked it up, steadying my voice. Dad? Darren's voice came through, tight, low, already strung with anger. We need to talk. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. His words were sharp, almost shaking. You think you've won something? All you've done is drag this family's name through the mud. You embarrassed me. Marla, everyone. You should stop this, before it goes too far. The silence on my end only seemed to make him more agitated. Drop the fight, Dad. Just drop it. You don't want to know what'll happen if you don't. It wasn't just anger. There was fear in his voice, too, the kind that creeps in when a man feels the ground slipping out from under him. Before I could answer, another voice cut in. Hers. Marla's tone was colder than the Ohio winter pressing against the windows. She'd grabbed the phone from him. You think the court is your ally? She hissed. You think those neighbors whispering about us will stand by you? No. Burl. They'll forget you like yesterday's news. Her words quickened, venom dripping with each one. But Tommy and Lily? Oh, they won't forget. We'll make sure of that. Keep this up, and they'll never look at you the same way. And they'll hate their grandpa. Forever. The words landed like a punch I never saw coming. My grip on the phone tightened. For a moment, the courtroom, the forged documents, even the humiliation in church, none of it mattered compared to that single threat. My grandchildren's love was the one thing that kept me standing, and she knew it. She aimed right for the softest spot. When the line went dead, the silence was louder than their voices. I sat still, the receiver heavy in my hand, my breath shallow. The thought of Tommy's eyes narrowing at me, of Lily turning her back, was enough to make my chest ache. I must have sat that way for an hour, staring at the dim reflection in the window. The pieced-together fragments of my life pressing in on me. I'd fought my son in court, faced humiliation in public, but this was the kind of wound that could hollow a man out. A soft knock broke the silence. Fern stood in the doorway, her hands wrapped around a pie dish, steam still curling from the crust. Thought you could use some company, she said gently. She didn't press me for words, just sat across from me, the scent of apples filling the room. After a while, she spoke, quiet but firm. They can try to twist things. They can shout and lie, but Tommy and Lily aren't blind. Burl, children see more truth than adults ever will. Don't let their threats scare you out of what you already know. You are their grandfather. Nothing, Marla says, can take that from you. I felt something loosen in my chest. The weight didn't vanish, but her words reminded me of what mattered. Love rooted in truth was stronger than fear rooted in lies. Later, after she left, I opened my journal. The page stared back at me, waiting. My hand shook as I wrote. They may strike with lies, but I will answer with truth. They may try to use the children, but love will speak louder. Oh, I will not break. Closing the journal, I placed it beneath Lily's drawing. Their threats still echoed in my ears, but another sound echoed louder. Tommy's laughter from the garage that morning, Lily's small hand clutching mine. It was enough, more than enough. The fight wasn't over, but for the first time, I felt ready for the end. The morning of the final verdict broke clear and cold, the kind of Ohio winter sky that looked scrubbed clean overnight. Sunlight poured across the frost-dusted grass outside my villa, and for the first time in weeks, I felt more anticipation than dread. A suit hung on the back of my chair, pressed by Fern the night before. She had dropped by with a basket of muffins and the reminder that dignity shows in how a man carries himself, not in how loudly he fights. Driving downtown with Sterling beside me, the courthouse loomed like a mountain of stone and glass. My pulse beat steady as we climbed the steps. I had been humiliated in garages, mocked at church, written off by my own blood, but today was different. Today the record would be set straight. Inside the courtroom, Darren and Marla sat shoulder to shoulder, stiff as statues. Marla's lips were pressed into a thin smile, the kind you wear when bluffing a hand that's already lost. Darren's shoulders slumped, his eyes darting around, avoiding mine. Luther and Vera whispered in the back row, less bold than before. The judge entered, and the room hushed. When the decision came, it fell like a hammer. The judge spoke clearly. All attempts to transfer or tamper with my estate were null and void. Full rights were affirmed to me. Burl Harlow, as sole owner. Darren and Marla were found to have acted in manipulation, bordering on fraud. Any control they sought over my assets was stripped away. Marla's face turned red, fury boiling over as she stormed from the room. Darren sagged in his chair, lips pressed tight, eyes glassy. For once, he had no words to wound me with. Sterling leaned toward me, whispering, "It's over. Burl, they can't touch you now." Relief washed through me, not triumphant, but steady. I didn't raise my fist, didn't shout. Justice doesn't need applause. It just needs to stand. As I walked out, I caught sight of Tommy and Lily near the hall. Their small hands clutched each other, their faces caught between fear and hope. "Grandpa," Tommy whispered, his voice trembling. "Mom said things that weren't true, didn't she?" I knelt, knees stiff but heart softening. "Truth never breaks. Son, it only waits to be seen." Lily pressed into my arms, tears wetting my coat. "You'll always have me," I told them, steady and sure. Their embrace undid me more than any verdict ever could. By late afternoon, I returned to the villa. The house welcomed me with quiet warmth. On the wall hung Lily's drawing, our family, with me in the center. Fern arrived carrying a basket of bread, and without words, she set it on the table. We sat together, the winter sun sinking, golden light spilling through the windows. The weight of months lifted from my shoulders. I had been shoved into a garage, made to feel like an afterthought. But I had walked back out into the world and reclaimed what mattered, my dignity, my bond with my grandchildren, and the truth of who I was. I leaned back, listening to the crackle of the fire. Age was not weakness. Silence had never been surrender. And no matter how far betrayal reached, truth always outlived lies. I had been pushed into a garage, but I walked back into my villa, not just as a man with a house, but as a grandfather with his honor intact.